When a star player, I mean, an elite offensive engine, a guy putting up huge numbers, is still owed nearly $140 million, how does a front office decide he's not an asset, but actually a financial liability? How does a franchise find the quote, exit rump on a $215 million deal? That is the absolutely brutal, cold blooded question facing the Atlanta Hawks right now with Trae Young. And this isn't, just some routine locker room drama or a spat with the coach. This is a terrifying economic reality. It's dictated by a fixed NBA salary cap and just the most unforgiving financial calculation of player value you can imagine. The Hawks are sitting on this massive investment, and all the reports suggest they're ready to admit the ROI is underwater. Today, we are diving deep. We're going to connect the internal chaos in Atlanta directly to a revolutionary new analytical framework. We are going to show you the math that proves why the Hawks feel they have to trade Young. It's a shortcut, really, to understanding the economic engine that drives modern NBA roster building.
Exactly. We're going to synthesize all these recent and confirmed trade reports that signal the Hawks' urgent desire to move either Young or DeJounte Murray. We'll focus on the stark quantitative evidence that shows the failure of their very expensive backcourt partnership, and we'll look at the strategic pivot that's being driven by the emergence of Jalen Johnson. But our mission, really, fundamentally, is to ground all this trade speculation, all the drama and the rumors in this new analytical framework. It's one that lets us measure the realized return on investment, or ROI, for NBA player salaries. We're applying this novel metric directly to the Hawks situation to quantify the true cost of Young's availability or lack thereof and his defensive limitations against that max contract. When you understand the frankly terrifying break-even point required for a player on his salary, the whole idea of an exit ramp isn't just logical. It becomes an inevitability.
Okay, so let's unpack what's happening on the ground in Atlanta. The pressure is on right now, especially with the play-in tournament cycle always kind of threatening their season. But the core crisis, it seems to me, is rooted in two intersecting problems: Young's financial status and just the spectacular failure of the team's biggest strategic bet. Let's start with the money, because that feels like the foundation for every single move they're thinking about making.
It is. Trae Young is locked into what's called a designated rookie extension. This is an elite contract. It's reserved for top-tier players, and it's valued at a massive 5-year, $215.16 million commitment.
Wow.
Yeah. This is the kind of money that usually buys you a solidified franchise cornerstone for, half a decade.
And what makes this contract a crisis right now isn't just the total number. It's the immediate pressure this thing puts on the cap sheet moving forward. That base salary is getting close to $46 million for next season alone.
Right.
And then there's the long-term leverage.
That's the real kicker. The final year of that deal, 2026-27, holds a $48.97 million player option.
$49 million.
Almost. And that option is critical because, given Young's age, he could just exercise it. And that would essentially bind the Hawks to nearly $50 million in cap space, way down the road. It limits their flexibility dramatically, especially if they feel they need to rebuild or, retool the roster around different pieces. That kind of guaranteed money, it demands consistency and high-level success, like yesterday.
And from what we're hearing from league insiders, Atlanta is not acting like a team that wants that financial commitment long-term.
Absolutely not. The sentiment league-wide isn't just speculation anymore. It's a growing belief that the Hawks are more open to trading Young away than they've ever been. We're hearing reports that the Hawks are actively seeking an exit ramp for Young. I mean, think about that terminology, exit ramp. That's the language of corporate divestment, not sports strategy.
Yeah, that's cold.
It is. They're looking for a financially viable way out of the obligation.
And what about the most undeniable signal that this is ending? The fact that the organization did not make any attempt to get him signed to an extension. Why is that such a massive red flag?
Because it's just standard operating procedure for a superstar. I mean, if a franchise sees a player as the untouchable face of their organization, they engage in those extension talks early, often before the contract is even close to expiring.
Right, to show commitment.
To show commitment, to ensure stability, refusing to even open the door to talking about the future with your marquee player. It tells the whole league, and it tells us that they fully expect that massive contract to be someone else's problem very soon. They're strategically avoiding any move that would make a trade more complicated.
So we've got a massive restrictive contract and a front office that's basically sending up smoke signals saying they want out. But this whole decision, it was really catalyzed by what happened on the court after they invested a ton to try and solve their problems. I'm talking about the failure of the dual guard experiment.
This is the real failure point. It's the point of no return. the core strategic decision to pair Trae Young with DeJounte Murray has, well, it's just not worked.
Yeah.
The Hawks invested 2 massive contracts and a ton of draft capital to get Murray. They were thinking they were creating this super backcourt that would, raise their defensive ceiling and give them a secondary playmaker.
And
Instead, they created offensive redundancy and defensive confusion.
the idea on paper seems sound, though. Murray takes the toughest defensive assignment, Young gets to rest on that end, and Murray can handle the ball when Young is playing off ball.
In theory, yes. But in practice, the lineup created defensive matchups that other teams could just exploit over and over. And the offensive rhythm was just consistently clunky.
And we have hard numbers to back this up, right? This isn't just the eye test.
The quantitative evidence is undeniable. The team has a negative 5.8 net rating when both stars are on the court together.
Minus 5.8.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. Net rating is your point differential per 100 possessions. A negative 5.8 means that when your 2 most expensive players, the 2 guys you built the whole franchise around, are playing together, your team is getting outscored by almost 6 points every 100 possessions.
That is the literal definition of a failed pairing.
It is. When you realize they're paying close to $80 million combined for that net negative result, you can understand why there's panic.
Yeah, it forces the coaching staff, specifically Quinn Snyder, into this impossible spot. You have 2 max players who, by playing together, are actively sinking the ship.
And the contrast is what makes it so damning. Look at the team's performance when their minutes are staggered, meaning only one of them is on the court at a time.
Okay.
The team maintains a positive net rating in both scenarios. A solid plus 2.1 net rating when Young is on and Murray is off.
Okay, so they're better.
And a positive plus 1.1 net rating when Murray is on and Young is off.
So the team is better when Young is running the show alone, and the team is also better when Murray is running the show alone.
Exactly. That swing, it's nearly an 8-point differential between the together lineups and the apart lineups, is the definitive argument against this backcourt. It's mathematical proof that the investment failed.
And this failure is what led to them struggling, right? They were 24-32 at one point with both guards available.
That's right. They just couldn't consistently overcome the drag of their core tandem. And this data forces a huge coaching challenge long before you even think about a trade.
So for you, listening right now, and you're armed with this concrete data, if you were Coach Snyder and you know that the 2 stars you have to play make the team almost 8 points worse when they're together, how do you manage their rotation? You can't just bench a max contract player, but you can't survive playing them 40 minutes a night together either. That is the operational problem the Hawks are trying to solve by trading one of them.
And the difficulty in maximizing Young's value, which is substantial, is rooted in this fundamental contradiction in his game. Objectively, he's a phenomenal talent. He's an all-star scorer, an elite passer, consistently putting up numbers like 24 points and almost 11 assists.
He's a walking 3-point threat. He can manipulate defenses in the pick and roll like very few others. But that offensive genius comes with a massive, massive defensive toll.
Yes. Despite his offensive brilliance, he remains unequivocally a negative defender who gets targeted in key moments. And this isn't just about, occasionally losing his man. Opponents actively hunt him. They seek him out on every single possession late in games because they know they can get a favorable matchup.
This goes beyond just a simple defensive rating stat. It impacts the entire team's defensive scheme, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
When you have a massive defensive liability on the floor, the other 4 players have to be constantly shifting and rotating to mitigate that one weakness.
It's like playing with 4 defenders instead of 5.
In a way, yeah. And this defensive limitation is repeatedly cited in league circles as the crucial factor that will always put a ceiling on the Hawks. I mean, think about the roster construction implications of that. A small point guard who can't defend demands that the entire roster be built around elite, versatile defenders. You need big men who can roam and protect the rim, and you need those rangy, athletic wings, the positionless players who can switch onto smaller guards and cover a ton of ground.
And those guys are expensive. The elite defensive glue guys, they come at a premium.
Exactly. So the financial question then becomes, how much does it cost the Hawks to buy enough defense to cover for Trae Young's weakness? Because you're not just paying his salary, you're paying a premium tax on the rest of the roster just to mask his deficiencies.
And to really answer that, we have to zoom out and apply this new financial tool we've been talking about, the one designed specifically to measure these kinds of costs.
Right. To understand why the Hawks are willing to take such a massive risk, potentially even having to pay someone not to play for them, we need to stop looking at player performance through traditional stats and start looking at it through financial tools. This framework introduces a really novel, rigorous way to quantify a player's economic value within the confines of the rigid NBA salary cap system.
The NBA is a global, multi-billion-dollar business. We just saw the Phoenix Suns sell for a staggering $4 billion. This is high finance, it demands corporate accountability, but the core engine of the league, the players, is restricted by a constraint that most big businesses don't face, a fixed salary cap.
Precisely. For the 2022-23 season, for instance, the total salary limit per team was somewhere between, $111 million on the floor and over $123 million on the high end. Since that player budget is essentially a fixed pool of capital, a team's success is directly tied not just to talent, but to maximizing the realized value from that fixed pool of money.
And traditional box scores, points, rebounds, assists, they tell you what a player did, but they don't account for that economic pressure. They don't tell you how much value that player delivered per dollar spent. That's the gap this new framework is trying to fill.
This framework, which was developed recently, it presents the first known methodology to formally link a player's intricate, nuanced on-court performance directly to a financial return calculation. It treats the player's contract, Young's $215 million, as an initial investment in a financial time series.
It's an investment that has to pay dividends.
It has to. It's a crucial shift in perspective. Instead of seeing the contract as just compensation, we see it as a corporate expenditure that has to be justified on the back end.
Okay, so let's get into the engine of this framework. It's called the Game Contribution Percentage, or GCP.
That's right. Conceptually, GCP is a summary statistic designed to allocate the total financial value of a single game to its participants. And for ease of comparison across all teams and all games, the metric is designed so it always sums to 100% for each team in every game.
So if the total value a team generates in a game is 100%, and player A contributed 20%, player B contributed 15%, and so on, that's their GCP.
Exactly. And the reason this metric is so powerful is its comprehensiveness. It doesn't just rely on, the 3 or 4 most glamorous stats. It is deliberately wide, incorporating 37 different categories of statistical input.
37.
37. This includes everything from traditional stats to hustle metrics, detailed defensive tracking, and specific play type data.
That sounds incredibly complex. How do you make sure that by including so much, you're not just rewarding the player who's on the floor the longest, regardless of how efficient they are?
That's where the key principles of the GCP calculation come in. And these principles intentionally deviate from traditional box score logic. First, we have process over results. Traditional metrics often punish a great pass if the guy who gets it misses the shot.
Right, no assist.
No assist. The GCP consciously prefers input metrics that indicate a player's positive process, even if the result is a failure. For example, it tracks potential assists over traditional assists.
Wait, hold on. Potential assists over traditional assists. So you're actively choosing to ignore the final result of the play.
We are choosing to recognize the passer's excellence. If Trae Young draws 2 defenders, throws a brilliant skip pass to an open teammate in the corner, and that teammate misses the 3, Young did his job perfectly.
He created a good shot.
He generated value for the team. He shouldn't be penalized on his contribution score because a teammate had a poor outcome. This focuses the metric on measuring contribution, not just success.
That's a subtle but really profound difference. It rewards the creation of opportunity. So what about defense, which is notoriously hard to quantify?
That brings us to the second principle, value all activity. We acknowledge that a player can have a huge impact on a game without logging a point, a rebound, or an assist. The framework accounts for defensive impacts that traditional box scores miss entirely, like contested shots, screen assists, successful box outs, even the distance traveled on offense and defense. If a player runs 40 feet to close out on a shooter, even if the shooter passes the ball away, that defensive effort contributed to changing the outcome of the possession. It has value.
So this sounds like an effort to finally quantify the dirty work, the stuff that makes winning teams successful, but often keeps those players on minimum contracts.
Precisely. And this leads to the third principle, which is probably the one that generates the most controversy, sign and effect agnostic.
Okay.
The calculation does not distinguish between a traditionally positive or negative contribution.
Hold on a second. You're saying turnovers, which are clearly a negative, still count toward a player's contribution. Isn't that just rewarding a bad player who shoots too much or is careless with the ball?
That's an excellent challenge, and it really gets to the core philosophy of this metric. Turnovers and even missed shots, they count toward contribution because they indicate high usage and high involvement in the game's outcome. They show the player had the ball in a critical moment and was trusted to make a play. The GCP is fundamentally a measure of a player's total involvement in generating the game's value, not necessarily their success rate. Since the framework later compares this contribution against their massive salary, it's assumed that a highly paid player should have high usage. If a player is getting paid $50 million and has a low GCP, that means they're not involved, and that is a massive financial inefficiency.
I think I get it. So the risk Trae Young takes by being a high-usage player, which leads to turnovers, is actually better for his GCP than being a low-usage player who never takes risks. The framework is inherently usage-centric, and it penalizes the highly paid player who's passive.
You got it.
So how do we translate this percentage of contribution into actual money?
We need a financial conversion calculation. The framework defines this using the concept of single game value, or SGV. We start with the total pool of player salaries across the entire league. For the 2022-23 season, the total league-wide player compensation was over $4.47 billion.
That's the total investment the NBA makes in its players for one season.
Exactly. Now, to find the SGV, we divide this huge salary pool by the total number of team game units in a standard season. With 1,230 games played, that means there are 2,460 total team game units.
2 teams per game.
Right. 2,460 opportunities to allocate value. So by dividing the $4.47 billion by 2,460 units, the framework established an SGV benchmark of approximately $1,818,162 per game.
Whoa. So over $1.8 million. That's the average economic value of player compensation allocated to the 2 teams playing on any given night.
That's it. So if Trae Young generates, say, 20% of the Hawks' GCP in a game, he has generated 20% of that $1.8 million value, about $363,000, for the organization in realized economic value in that one game.
And that lets you calculate the actual realized return.
Precisely. We use a classic financial formula. The player's salary, Young's 40+ million, is treated as the initial investment, the time zero investment. It's a negative cash flow for the team. The sum of their per-game contributions, their GCP multiplied by the SGV for each game, forms this series of positive cash flows over the course of the season.
And then you calculate the ROI using the internal rate of return method, the IRR. For listeners who aren't finance majors, what is the IRR in this context?
The IRR is essentially the rate of return you get back on your initial investment. Think of it like this. If you spend $100 and you get exactly $100 back in returns over the year, your IRR is 0. You broke even.
Okay.
The team spends $40 million on Trae Young. The IRR tells us how much realized value he has to generate before that investment breaks even. If the IRR is positive, the player is providing value above his contract. If it's negative, the player's a net financial loss, at least based on regular season performance.
So the contract is like a massive mortgage. The player owes the team, and every game he plays successfully is a payment back, the moment he misses a game.
That payment is missed. And that brings us to the most critical element for the Hawks. Since GCP is a per-game metric, any missed game, due to injury, load management, whatever, is recorded as a zero cash flow. The study calls it